city architect, an advocate for a sustainable city? Hi, my name is Marcin Wojciech-Żebrowski and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast, my podcast about urbanism, architecture, cities and many more. Hi and welcome to the newest episode of the podcast and also the last episode of the year, or at least according to my plan. This is the last conversation, at least in English, that I'm having this year, and I thought that it will be good to have someone special as a guest. And I think that I found a very, very prominent and special guest, and I'm very happy to say that today I will be talking to Nathalie de Vries, who is the DV in MVRDV, so one of the founding partners of one of the most prominent international architecture companies based in the Netherlands, who changed the perspective on the industry. But today, surprisingly, we will be not talking about the work of MVRDV, but we will focus on being a city architect. I don't know if you know or not, but besides being one of the founding partners of the big architecture company, Nathalie is just finishing her 3 years term as the city architect of Groningen in the Netherlands. And that was something that was extremely interesting to me. How is she managing to combine the work in the commercial office, but also being this public advisor to how the city should look like? We are discussing the experience that she's using from MVRDV in her daily work, but also what are the challenges and what is, in general, the role of a city architect, especially in the Dutch context. And also what are the big burning challenges, like the housing crisis that is very present, especially in the Netherlands. We're also discussing something very close to my heart because we are talking about some experience of Nathalie that she gained in Poland while working on some Polish projects in Wrocław and Poznań, and how can actually those learnings can be introduced to her work on a daily basis. This is the last episode, very special to me, with a very fantastic guest that I learned a lot from and that it was such a big pleasure to talk to. Welcome to the last episode of this season of Urbcast with Nathalie de Vries. I will start by saying, Nathalie, welcome to Urbcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very pleased that we will today discuss something that is very interesting to me and the listeners. So we will talk about this intersection of architecture and urbanism, but especially this intersection and this overlap that you have between the commercial architecture, but also being the city architect of Groningen for the last 3 years. How did it happen that you've actually transitioned in a way to being the city architect? This is something that it happens sometimes, that a professional architect working on the commercial field is switching sides, so to say, but you are, of course, still with the MVRDV. So how was it for you the last 3 years, since in 2020 you became the city architect, but still, of course, was working commercially?
Yeah, very busy, I must say. Yeah, it's part of a typical Dutch phenomena of the stadsbouwmeester. And not just Groningen, but more cities have this function. And in the last years, in the last decades, it's always been somebody who is a professional who does this together with his or her professional career. But to make sure, you are, of course, not allowed to do serious commissions in the city that you are working. Or if you would already have a commission, you are not allowed to make any judgments about them. Then you have to step down and will be replaced. But the phenomena of city architect is something that actually grew after the European tender laws started. And also municipalities started to outsource their work on architecture. And not just municipalities, also the state, the railroad company. There's a state architect as well. There's a chief railroad architect. Recently in the Netherlands, the police also have a police architect. And yeah, in all cases, you could say they are usually architects, sometimes urbanists. And usually people with affinities in both fields that support institutions like cities to make selections, make judgments about the architectural quality in a city. In my case, I was also engaged a lot in the urban design and planning policies of the city. But yeah, it's always deliberately for a shorter term. And let's say somebody from the field of people that would normally be selected for commissions as well. So in a way, yeah, you're on the inside as a consultant, sometimes hired, almost always part-time or for a couple of days a week. Yeah, so it is actually to replace the fact that there are very few architects anymore working inside government in the Netherlands.
Why is that? Because that's a very interesting topic. I was discussing with Rob Adams, the city architect of Melbourne, a couple of months ago. And we've been discussing that a couple of decades ago. It was very common for a city to have the big team of architects working with the projects, but it somehow shifted. Why is that?
Well, I don't know about Australia, but in Europe, in the Netherlands, it certainly had to do with the fact that on the one hand, governments wanted to be leaner. And on the other hand, they didn't want their own in-house office. It was thought of as inefficient. And they also thought that in the market, let's say amongst people, the regular architects' offices, there would be enough knowledge, but you would only have to have an in-house architect to help to judge and steer. The governments in the Netherlands are now mainly the clients and supervisors, and they don't make any designs in the architectural field. They still do it in urban planning and urban design, but not in architecture. But even in the last field, a lot of offices are hired to make plans, and also they are often supervised by external parties. Sometimes it is the designers that made the scheme, and sometimes that is even a hired person. But we have a hybrid system in the Netherlands.
Since with this discussion, we can summarize your term as a city architect. You've just told me before the start of this discussion that you are just finishing your term. That was the 3 years. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to summarize. Did you feel powerful, or maybe in another ways, what is the mandate of a city architect? What can he or she influence, and in what instances it's more of a representative function?
Well, representative it surely is not, because in my job description, I'm summoned to take care of the quality, especially of the larger projects in the city, larger urban planning and the larger buildings that will be made. But I'm also asked to give advice, even if I'm not asked for it, also unasked advice. It's also cultivate that you're an outsider. Yeah, so I was doing it on average almost 2 days a week. What I did is that I helped to supervise the larger projects in the city. Also, at some point, the negotiations started for the building of a new theater complex. So then I helped to judge how the master plan is made. I engage with what kind of selection process should be made. How should juries be composed? What does the brief look like? I was also in juries of municipal buildings and master plans, the redoing of the town square, a new cultural institute for amateurs. And at the same time, my unsolicited advice role regarded, for example, figuring out why and how the university and its many buildings would develop in a city. We were working on a campus master plan, but also in the inner city, I saw some issues arising. At that point, indeed, I was in contact shortly after I started with the rector of the university, and we talked together about the quality of buildings and their sites. And then she invited me to talk to the board, and I used that to give a small lecture on the future of universities and university campuses. And from that point on, I managed to start a better relationship between the city and the university. So that's an example where I could influence the future development. Groningen, 1/5 of the population of Groningen is a student, actually. It's really a university town. The buildings of the university, also the hospital, some big institutions. And also there are several educational institutions very dominant in the city. Also the population, the people who work there, having a good conversation and having a good influence together on how to develop that has a major impact on the quality of the city.
What were some of the learnings that you could transfer from your work as an architect in MVRDV, some experience that you developed working on the commercial market, often, I guess, also with public clients, but then being on the another side.
Yes, I think one of the most important roles that I see for these city architects and other state architects is to use the power of integrative design thinking and of imagination and of the important role that designers can play in finding solutions for complex problems or being part of the solution, let's say. And I can also, of course, be an advocate there for making designs, doing research by design, inviting good parties that really fit the commission. So I see myself always as a bit of an agent of architecture and urban design, or an ambassador, a go-between. But certainly being experienced is something that is of benefit in this job. Thinking in a certain way, thinking also from the side of the person who will take on the commission, having been able to understand how you can work together with clients by making good proposals, doing research as a designer. And on the other hand, as an architect and urban designer myself, I think it's also interesting at some point to have a period where you can stand on the side of the client and be much more at the forefront of the development. So, for example, we have in Groningen a big plan to change, transform, and build schools. I think it's more over 20. So there, for example, we really want to make sure that we are upgrading the schools in the right way, that we take sustainability into consideration, that this is really going to be the new school, that it can be the heart of a neighborhood. So there, together with the municipality, you can really work on the brief. And often first, researches are done by several offices before actually the brief is consolidated together with the school boards. So there you see really how you can actively influence, let's say, the making and the first part of the commission. And that is, of course, architects usually have to just, you get a brief, you get a site, you get a commission. And we know nowadays that it's ever more important what is in that brief. What is it taken into consideration? Is the budget right? Why this location? Why renewal and why a new building and not urban renewal or restoring and all these things? And this is, I learn a lot from it. Also from my own practice, how do municipalities think? What can they actively influence? And also for me as a designer, it's rewarding that I can, let's say, step up to a certain degree and be the client for once. Or not, I'm not the client, but I'm, let's say, part of the client team.
Since I'm working in architecture myself and actually in business development, I think that it is important to mention that you often have to challenge the brief and push the boundaries of the building, right? And speaking of the challenges, did you have a moment that you've been very surprised by maybe a process once you've been the city architect and you thought, oh my God, if that was in MVRDV, we would do it completely different?
Well, I do think a municipality has to be very cautious. So processes can take quite long. So it has to be looked at from a lot of different angles. So let's say within my office, we are used to a bit of a faster speed of working sometimes. But having said that, of course, we also demand from our cities to be very careful and responsible and integrate the wishes of community as well. So it should be very open processes. But I also noticed that sometimes information and behavior and steering can be quite, let's say, many people are involved sometimes with the same subject. So what I did, for example, was dedicate myself also to understanding the processes that lead to giving a commission, especially the selection of architects. I worked in the last year together with Erik Dorsman, a guideline how to select architects to make it more according to how big is the commission, what can you ask in the pre-phase, how do you select architects, what kind of preconditions do you ask? So to make sure that it's balanced, that you don't over-ask in a selection, that there's a way to invite architects that maybe haven't made 10 buildings in the same type already. How can you stimulate that young architects get a role? And also this phenomena of doing a pre-research can be quite important. Like you say, questioning the brief is also maybe sometimes starting up a dialogue with a client or a school board or a theater director, so that there can be some communication before a fixed brief is put on the market and the selection is made. So the process of selecting an architect, I realized, could be improved. So I worked on a new guideline there, and can also understand, of course, that the topic of sustainability has been quite a large topic within also my performance and my function.
How can we avoid some of the misunderstandings that happen while developing projects? It can be going over budget, or it may be a big delay. And now, once you have this overview of both private and public practice, do you think that there are some maybe tips that you could share with architects and also the clients, the public clients, so they could improve the dialogue in between them?
Well, like I said, preparation is key on one hand. Know your own commission quite well. And that also means probably also rethinking the budget a couple of times. So let's not be too naive in that. And that starts, of course, on the client side, really understanding the complexity sometimes of the commission. On the other hand, I think architects working for government and public institutions also realize there's a limit to budgets, of course. So we all have to do our best to make that work. It's not there's a fix. To be honest, if processes take very long, you can't predict everything. So you also have to deal with the unpredictable and the inevitable. Sometimes I think in the public institutions, it's also important that you have to make a statement there and not be too scary to say, this is what we want. I must say that is something that I found in the municipality of Groningen. There's no fear of making a choice and a statement there. City of Groningen is, for example, known for its Groningen Forum, very nice public facility with library and movie center and all kinds of public facilities. So they are not too afraid to make choices. It's a question of the long term and the long breath, as they say in the Netherlands, to persist and to keep the quality alive.
I've read that you wanted to leverage Groningen's courage in design, but it seems like there was some spirit there already, some background that you could build on the top of. But what would you say, or how could you approach as a city architect of another city where it's not maybe brave enough yet? What would be the tools that you would integrate in such a municipality so that they could start demanding more from the designers and architects?
Well, I think, although, of course, also in Groningen, you have 4-year political terms with elections and all, it is a city with a long-term vision. And the long-term vision is on the quality of life of its inhabitants, which is always at the forefront. So that means that there is long-term policies on how to deal with traffic in the city, for example. It was already starting in the 70s to think about banning the car from its city heart. It is nowadays making plans to facilitate parking bicycles underground. And there's a whole scheme to transform public space in the long term and prepare it for climate change, making it greener, dealing with abundance of water and draft and heat, but also find ways to place cars in a different way. Not ban it altogether. It's a provincial town, so a lot of people are relying still on the car. To make a more equal balance there in the public space. And of course, same has to be done with the quality of life for everybody, no matter what your income is and your position in the town. And that's part of a long-term tradition and policy, which is really in the veins of the civil servants there. There are long-term programs. And of course, elections can change a bit the accent of that program. But I think everybody in the municipality and in town hall agrees that so far the benefits for the city have been that indeed it is very well ranked on lists of people feeling happy and healthy. You can really see that is also a matter of ideology and long-term vision. So I think the advice would be manage as a city to create this kind of policies and convince and help the politicians to see the benefits of that. And then what you can see is that newly elected politicians are still able to add their own aspects to that and their own accents. And that's good because we do it for the people, of course, of the town, and the people of the town have spoken. If you understand that design quality can be a vital element of the development of your town, you're also more open and inviting to getting the best designers in the commissions. And then everybody also feels very proud to see the results of that.
I would like to develop this long-term thinking in the design. You've done some work in Poland, the country that I'm from, and I feel like, unfortunately, we too often have this short-term vision, both in the government, but also on the municipality level, where, of course, we also have the elections every 4 years. And if the council political climate changes, it is often hard to continue some of the projects. And since also in the Netherlands or in Groningen, the term of the politicians is also only 4 years, and the term of a city architect is even shorter, what were your priorities when you were starting your work? Because I can assume that you probably identified some of the areas, some challenges of the city that it is, of course, not realistic to influence over such a short period.
Yeah. I think as such, of course, the city has also a challenge to safeguard its origins and its cultural values. So I respect that conversation. It's the same conversation we have in the city of Groningen as well, that has a lot of medieval origins. So you see a lot of nice old buildings and urban structures that you want to somehow respect and live with. In Poland, I worked for private clients, and I always felt that they really felt very responsible for the town they were working in. Also something I recognize in some of the developers in the city of Groningen. It's like I'm helping also to build my city and to build the quality for my own environment. And what was very nice working with the clients we had in Poland for the Concordia projects in the Baltic is that they were willing to not completely go to the max as regarding to filling building envelopes and zoning. They agreed that for a large part at the ground floor level and at a higher level, we integrated at least publicly accessible functions and made sure that around the buildings there will be nice public spaces that they also partly made and sponsored. So that means that even though there were commercial buildings that we made, everywhere where it sort of touched the city and influenced the public space, the public realm, we could make interventions, make design interventions that were interactive. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of our time. Let's say in Poland, we managed to find a client who exactly wanted this. I think they also invited us because of this attitude. Cities that collaborated. And I also say exactly the same to my own clients in my office, but also in the city of Groningen. The University of Groningen, for example, make sure that if we build ever more volumes and meters and taller buildings, that at least the ground floors of our buildings are interactive and semi-public. And that's what keeps, and that we make nice squares and streets and places around them, because that's what will keep our cities habitable and nice. And also enlarges the acceptance, of course, for building also commercial real estate in some places, but also institutions. So with the clients of the Baltic and the Concordia building in Wrocław and Poznan, we managed to very generous open spaces at the ground floor and at the rooftops. But also in Groningen, I talked to the university about exactly the same things. Like, we do not want in our inner city a building that is almost closed, where the curtains are always closed, where nothing is happening. The garbage is standing outside and some car parks for the board. But we want to be able to use your public spaces, your squares. They're thinking about making their program accessible in the evening as well for the people living around it. No backsides in the inner city. So it's exactly the same conversation. And it all has to do with how can we keep our cities livable and provide for growing demands at the same time. So I think I always more or less have the same ideas about this. We have the same ideas about this. And then depending on where I am, I can influence this in a different way. It's a general question for our cities. We know there are many cities are growing or need to do something to keep economically sustainable. We know our precious space has to be shared for ever more functions. It's the climate change will demand of us to plant more trees and make more open soil and cool places. But we also want to make sure that it's not just for the happy few, but that this happens for everybody. And that also, for example, we don't over-gentrify certain areas and keep them accessible for people with all kinds of income. It all demands space and some kind of ways to figure out how do we have to, in a balanced way, divide space between people. Sounds very generic, but it's a job. It's called urban planning, I think. And that's what we are working on, of course, in a very good quality. This is the long-term vision, and it can have different accents at times, but this is what we should be working on, I think.
Urban planning, it is a hard job indeed. And I think that some countries are doing better and some are doing worse. And talking about improving the urban planning and the quality of public spaces, I'm curious about some of your inspirations. So, for example, I think in Poland, as Polish people, we would have this complex of like urban space that we would look up to Denmark or the Netherlands as the countries that really, really excel in urban spaces and in life quality in cities. But maybe, was there something that inspired you in Poland? Something that you thought, oh, that's actually functioning very well. Maybe I should think of introducing it somewhere else, or in Groningen. And not only Poland, maybe you had some other cities and countries that inspired you. And if so, what were they?
I noticed in my projects in Poland, well, a couple of things. First of all, of course, you have demolition going on, but there was also a lot of attention for remaining old structures and repurposing existing industrial buildings and areas. And I think there's some really nice, that's really nice to see. So that's quite advanced. And I think the examples, I think people from the Netherlands and Denmark could actually go to Poland and look at beautiful examples there. What I also liked is that you, at least in the projects I worked and also in the people I encountered, there was a lot of sensitivity for the cultural aspects of your country, the graphic design, the furniture design, the artists. And I noticed a couple of times that really efforts are being made to engage artists. And we also loved things like the murals, for example. So, for example, in Wrocław, we have Alicia Bialek, who makes, pronounce her name correctly, who made beautiful wall paintings there, because there were already great graphic wall paintings on the site when we came there. So in general, a kind of sensitivity for the value of culture in the broader sense, beyond architecture and urban design, but also for public space design. That's something I appreciated very much. And it almost came in a natural way. I don't know if it's because of the clients I worked with, but I presume that is also has to do with your history. A very good idea about tradition, contemporary tradition, the role of artists, modern art, contemporary art in that. I really felt that it was part of the culture of your country. So I really appreciated that. I sometimes miss that a bit in the Netherlands, I must say. In the Netherlands, these things are more sort of forced. Everything is maybe more regulated, but also these kind of things sometimes just have to happen top down. And if they're not mentioned, they're simply not done. It's not so natural. It doesn't come so natural, I think, as it did in Poland. I appreciated that.
So is it about keeping the identity? Something that you could learn?
Yeah, dangerous word, I think, because whose identity then? Let's say what we have to think about, for example, in campus design. There's so many different people there in cities nowadays. So how can we make sure that nobody feels excluded or left out on one hand? And how can we use the existing identity also in such a way that it doesn't become empty or hollow, just an image of the identity? That's another aspect. Yeah, do we live in the same ways as our ancestors did? I think cities have been influenced a lot by the way we move around. We were just talking about all the students living in a city, for example, the usage of the car or not, our behavior with our, just the simple fact that so many things can be ordered online has a huge impact on shops. So there's a lot of people crying about how shops are disappearing or certain types of shops disappearing. But at the same time, everybody also buys a lot of things online, also food, etc. And so then suddenly, you see things happening and people think they should be controlled. It's like being against the data center. Nobody likes data centers and logistic boxes. in the fields. And at the same time, we're all ordering stuff online and using our telephones to the max and eating up data to the max. So we have to realize that our way of living nowadays, that we also like, it also has consequences that we have to deal with, also in the urban and in the landscape realm. So if you want to ban that, I think what we see nowadays, for example, in shopping, is that I think the big shops can take care of themselves very much, but we also have to regulate more there. So should the inner city of a town be full of dark stores where kids on bicycles with backpacks drive around bags of crisps and pizzas, just because that's how people live apparently in the inner city? Or should we figure out ways to support small entrepreneurs to start up a little firm? How does that mix with the rental prices of shops in the inner cities? Yeah, so I think maybe we become very demanding altogether. Maybe it's important, it's maybe something that's not done enough, is that we explain more, what as urban planners also, what the consequences are of our way of living, and not just trying to solve the extremities that come with it as well. So do we know enough? Do we explain enough? Does the public know enough about this phenomena? That could be an interesting question. So we try to talk about it. In Groningen, there's an annual conference, 3-day conference called Let's Grow. Grow as in Groningen, grow, without a W. But that's a conference in which the city has open meetings about town planning, about traffic, about new projects, about these kind of developments, how to deal with water. There's all kinds of themes, and everybody in the city can participate. It is in this Groningen Forum. In Rotterdam, for example, has something similar called the City Maker Congress. It's a bit more for professionals, but it's where cities share their experiences on how to make city. Yeah, so a lot is changing very fast, and I think we have to learn. We keep on learning all the time, but also keep on explaining and asking for, because that's the Let's Grow. It's very interactive. So the municipality, the people, the audience talks back there. They comment. There's a discussion. There's a debate.
I can assume that there might be some angry people as well, as I was reading recently about some housing, not even challenge, but housing crisis in the Netherlands. And the cities are growing. Netherlands is very urban context. So maybe just to summarize this part with this one huge crisis and challenge, and I guess it could be present in Groningen as well. I'm just curious about your approach and your thoughts as an architect and urban designer to such a long-standing crisis, the housing crisis, namely.
Yeah, I must say, when I started 3 years ago, I thought, now I'm going to crack this, or I'm going to finally understand how this is working. Why is it not working? But in the meantime, legislation changed a couple of times. We have issues with stick stuff. Okay, that's the where you can build and not build according to regulations of NO2. Don't know the English word exactly. So the building prices have doubled. The construction prices have doubled. It's more complicated to get a loan. So in the Netherlands, one of the analyses is that we have then in the past decades too many cut downs on the affordable housing corporations that we had. So that's one problem. They're simply not able to invest enough. And that has been transformed in the last couple of years. So now they're looking for sites desperately. Also, analyses have been made. It's not so much refugees that are causing housing problems, but more migration of workers. So in the Netherlands, we have a lot of areas where we import a lot of people to do work that Dutch people are not able to do or do not want to do. And then immigrants come and work in the glass houses, for example, or in the slaughterhouses, or in industries where you not necessarily earn a lot of money. So, it's also a bit of a chicken-egg situation there. So if you want to have the industry, you need the workers. If you don't want to house them, why start the industry? Or make sure that the people who are inviting people to work here, to make sure that they get a house as well. And for example, the student housing, also a separate problem. I worked together with the university on, let's build a better campus, but also take responsibility and build more student housing. so that we don't all have to put them up in houses where somebody puts in 10 rooms and a bad shower and then earns a lot of money with that. So it is a multifaceted problem. But if I would have the key answer, no, I'm very sorry. It's very complicated, but it does have to do a lot with governmental policies, I would say, to start with. The Netherlands ended its Ministry of Spatial Planning a couple of years ago, saying local communities could solve it. But we start to see now that that is not a good solution. Support the the affordable housing corporations more and do some national planning again is a first step out of this crisis, I think.
That's one of the most pressing issues in the cities worldwide. So, of course, I wouldn't expect a clear answer from you, because I think that if you had the answer, you could already start implementing that everywhere.
Exactly, yeah. I wish I had it, but I can be part of the solution, I'd say. Yeah.
You can be part of the solution. And also that's why I'm happy that you joined Urbcast, because I want to inspire people through this conversation and through this podcast and reach out to many students and practitioners within the field. And because of that, I would like to finalize this discussion on this inspirational note. And I would like to ask you for some recommendation. So could you share some interesting knowledge with the listeners? It could be a book or maybe an article or maybe a piece of work, something that will leave the listeners inspired.
Yes, well, I'm currently reading a book called Darwin in the City. It was given to me by a friend. And the biologist, I'm sorry, I'm just lacking his name, but I'm pretty sure the book is translated in English as well. It's talking about how we can see cities not as a sort of anti-nature, but as just another form of nature. So if you start to look at your buildings as rocks and your squares as sort of valleys, you will realize that even in the city you can have a large amount of biodiversity, as long as you have a keen eye for it. So I thought it was quite an interesting and hopeful city, and also an interesting one in the discussion, like, are cities bad or not necessarily so. So I can really recommend that. And on the more let's say dystopian side, I'm also reading another book that is called again Ministry of the Future by an American author. And again, it was a bit early in the morning, I must say. Kim Stanley Robinson. That has a bit more dystopian view, but I must say I haven't read the end yet of the book. It's a science fiction novel about living already in the times of climate change and high temperatures and flooding and all and the likes, somewhere in the 2030s, I think, or 40s. A lot of different perspectives on how society tries to deal with that. So I would say, on the one hand, it's a very hopeful book, and the other one is a bit more dystopian. And I think hopefully somewhere there in between, we can make it work. And so I think we should keep utopia and dystopia looks in front of us as we can, because we have to think about the long term as planners, as city planners.
The first book was Darwin Comes to Town, How the Urban Jungle Drives, right?
Right, yeah.
Yes, I've heard about this book before, and I will add it into the episode's description, so anyone interested can see and potentially also just buy the book. I often buy the books that are recommended by my guests.
Okay.
I think I have this one already, but the second one I don't
Darwin
have it yet.
Darwin in the City, yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nathalie, I wanted to thank you very much for coming to Urbcast and for sharing this experience that you have. We focus mostly on your work as a city architect of Groningen, not that much about MVRDV today, but I think it's also very important to emphasize this role and this public experience with influencing architecture that you've experienced for the last 3 years. So thank you that we've been able to summarize this term and share some interesting remarks with the listeners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the newest episode of Urbcast and also to the last one in this season. I'm so thankful that you listened to this episode and perhaps also some other episodes of my podcast. And I hope to see you next year. Of course, this podcast is made with my listeners. So if you are feeling that there is lack of certain topics, please feel free to reach out to me and suggest some topics, suggest some guests, and we can develop this podcast further together into 2024. That was such a great privilege to be able to talk to you and accompany you wherever you are, maybe driving home, maybe working, maybe having a walk. I'm very pleased that you are willing to spend some of your private time with me, talking to you, and with my guests, of course, talking to you. And yeah, that was a great year because actually I've seen the Spotify Wrapped for this year. I realized that over half of the listeners discovered this podcast in 2023. And since we are growing in number, I hope that the statistic will be similar next year. So please share this podcast with your friends, with your coworkers, with whoever you actually think might find it interesting. And I will talk to you in 2024. Thank you.